The doctors had already given up, but the gesture of a simple construction worker saved the businessman. Walter Thompson had been hospitalized for 3 weeks at Mercy Memorial Hospital, the most expensive in Denver, unable to utter a single word or swallow any food. The best doctors in the country had already performed every possible test, but none could explain what was happening to the 70-year-old businessman. That's when Michael Harrison mistakenly entered room 312 during his work break. The 45-year-old construction worker had been renovating the 3rd floor of the hospital for 2 weeks and had gotten lost looking for the bathroom. Upon seeing the man in the bed, Michael stopped at the door, feeling a strange shiver run up his spine. "Sorry I came into the wrong room," said Michael, but something kept him from leaving that room. The businessman's face was familiar to him, from some distant place in his memory. The graying hair, the sunken eyes, the expression of suffering. Michael had seen that face before, but where? "You can't be here," said Catherine Thompson, the businessman's daughter, rising from the armchair beside the bed. "This is a private room." At 40 years old, Catherine wore expensive clothes and spoke with the authority of someone used to giving orders. Her tone was cold, calculating, very different from the anguish Michael would expect to see in a concerned daughter. "I work here on the renovation," explained Michael, but his eyes remained fixed on Walter's face. "It's just, I think I've seen this before." "Seen what?" asked Margaret, the businessman's wife, slowly rising from the other chair. At 68, Margaret had white hair and hands trembling from so much stress. Her simple clothes contrasted with the luxury surrounding the family, and her red eyes betrayed sleepless nights. "What's happening to your husband?" said Michael, approaching the bed. "I've seen someone like this before." "Don't be ridiculous," interrupted Catherine. "The best doctors in the country are taking care of my father. You're a construction worker. What could you possibly know about medicine?" But Margaret held her daughter's arm, preventing her from throwing Michael out. Something in the man's voice had sparked a hope she hadn't felt in weeks. "Speak," begged Margaret. "Please, tell us what you know." Michael looked again at Walter, who remained motionless, only his eyes moving slowly from side to side. It was as if he were trapped inside his own body, aware but unable to communicate. "A long time ago, I saw a man exactly like this," began Michael. "He couldn't speak, he couldn't swallow, but he was awake and understood everything. The doctors didn't know what it was either." At that moment, Dr. Richard Williams entered the room for his afternoon visit. The 50-year-old doctor, head of the medical team, stopped upon seeing the construction worker by the bed. "What's going on here?" asked the doctor, adjusting his glasses. "Who is this man?" "He says he's seen something similar to my husband's case before," explained Margaret, with a hint of hope in her voice. Dr. Williams let out a dry laugh. "Mrs. Thompson, with all due respect, your husband has a complex neurological condition that defies our understanding. It's not something that a—" he looked at Michael's dirty clothes— "manual laborer could understand." "But the doctors didn't understand it back then either," said Michael, not intimidated. "And yet the man was saved." "Saved how?" asked Margaret, ignoring her daughter's disapproving look. Michael took a deep breath, trying to organize the memories that were coming back to him. "It was 40 years ago. I was only 5. My father was working on the construction of a factory here in Denver. The boss had swallowed something during an accident at the construction site and ended up exactly like this." Walter's eyes moved toward Michael, as if something in those words had awakened a memory. "An old man from the area managed to help," continued Michael. "He did something specific, put his finger in the man's mouth and massaged his throat. Within minutes, the boss was speaking again." "That's absurd," said Dr. Williams. "I won't allow some charlatan to lay hands on my patient." But Michael had noticed something important. Walter's eyes were more alert now, darting rapidly between him and the doctors, as if desperately trying to communicate something. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now, back to the story. "Doctor, may I ask a question?" said Michael, moving closer to the bed. "Have you tried checking if there's something stuck in his throat?" "Of course we have," replied the doctor, visibly irritated. We did an endoscopy, a CT scan, an MRI. There's nothing blocking the passage. What if it's something very small, something the tests can't detect? Dr. Williams was about to respond when Walter began making a strange movement with his eyes, blinking repeatedly and staring at Michael with an intensity that startled everyone in the room. "What is he trying to say?" whispered Margaret. "He wants me to try," said Michael, with a certainty that surprised even himself. "May I try?" "Absolutely not," said Catherine, stepping between Michael and the bed. "I won't allow a stranger to touch my father." "Catherine, let him try," urged Margaret with rare firmness. "Mum, you're being influenced by desperation. This man could hurt Dad." "Your father hasn't improved in 3 weeks," Margaret replied, staring at her daughter. "The doctors don't know what to do. What do we have to lose?" The tension in the room was palpable. Dr. Williams positioned himself near the emergency button, ready to call security, while Catherine stood with her arms crossed defensively. "1 minute," said Michael. "Just give me 1 minute." Margaret nodded and Michael approached Walter. Gently, he placed his hand on the businessman's shoulder and whispered, "Mr. Thompson, do you know me? I'm Michael Harrison, son of Robert Harrison. My father worked on the construction of your first factory back in the 80s. Walter's eyes widened, and a tear rolled from the corner of his right eye. It was the first emotional reaction he had shown since being hospitalized. "I remember the accident," Michael continued. "You were supervising the construction when you swallowed that experimental chemical. My father told me the story many times." Walter tried to move his head, managing only a barely perceptible movement, but enough for everyone to see he was trying to nod. "I'm going to do what old Benjamin did back then," said Michael, bringing his hand closer to Walter's mouth. "Trust me." Just as Michael was about to put his finger in the businessman's mouth, Catherine shoved him hard, making him stumble and nearly fall. "Enough!" she shouted. "Security! Get this man out of here now!" 2 security guards quickly entered the room and grabbed Michael by the arms, but he managed to shout before being taken away. "Mrs. Thompson, I live in Hopetown, Maple Street, number 127. If you want to try, come find me." As Michael was dragged out, Walter began to stir in bed, moving his arms weakly and making incomprehensible sounds. It was as if he were trying to stop them from taking away his only hope. "Calm down, dear," said Margaret, holding her husband's hand. "Calm down." But Walter did not calm down. His eyes remained fixed on the door through which Michael had left, and his attempts to vocalize grew more desperate. That night, after Catherine went home to rest, Margaret remained alone in the room with her husband. It had been her routine for weeks, spending the entire day at the hospital and sleeping in the chair next to the bed. Around 2 in the morning, Walter began making strange movements, trying to remove the feeding tube. Margaret woke up frightened and called the nurse. "He's never done this before," said the nurse, an experienced 50-year-old woman named Martha. "He seems agitated about something." "Today a man came here, said he knew how to help my husband," Margaret told her. "My daughter didn't let him try." "And do you believe the man?" Margaret looked at her husband, who kept moving restlessly in bed. "Martha, my Walter hasn't spoken in 3 weeks, hasn't eaten properly. The doctors don't know what to do anymore. I'm afraid of losing him." "What did the man say he was going to do?" "Put his finger in Walter's mouth and do some kind of massage on his throat." Martha was thoughtful for a few seconds. "You know, Mrs. Thompson, I've worked in a rural hospital before, and I've seen things that medicine can't explain. Sometimes folk knowledge works in ways we don't understand. Catherine will be furious if she finds out." "Your daughter doesn't need to know everything," said Martha, with a complicit look. "What matters is your husband's well-being." Margaret mentally noted the address that Michael had shouted before being thrown out. If Walter's condition worsened, she knew what to do. The next morning, Dr. Williams arrived with worrying news. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to be honest with you," he said, looking gravely at Margaret and Catherine. "Your husband's condition isn't improving. In fact, some vital signs indicate there might be a deterioration." "What does that mean?" asked Catherine. "It means we may need to consider other care options." Margaret felt her heart race. "What kind of options?" "There are clinics specialized in long-term care, places where your husband can receive constant assistance while we wait for any change in his condition." Catherine exchanged a quick glance with the doctor, a look that Margaret couldn't interpret but that made her uncomfortable. "I'd like a second opinion," said Margaret. "Mum, Dr. Williams is the best in the city," Catherine countered. "If he thinks Dad needs specialized care, we should trust him. I'm not saying I don't trust him. I just want to hear from another doctor." "Mrs. Thompson," interrupted Dr. Williams, "I understand your concern, but consulting another doctor at this time might be counterproductive. Every day that passes without a decision is one day less that your husband has." Something about that phrase sounded odd to Margaret. It was as if the doctor was creating unnecessary pressure for a quick decision. After the doctor left, Margaret was alone with Catherine in the room. "Honey, I don't understand all this rush," said Margaret. "Your father is stable. He's not visibly getting worse. Mum, you don't understand medicine. If Dr. Williams says Dad needs specialized care, it's because he does. And what happens to the company while he's sick?" Catherine hesitated before answering. "I'm taking care of everything, Mum. You don't need to worry about that." Margaret knew her daughter well enough to know when she was hiding something. The evasive tone, the gaze that didn't meet hers, the rush to admit Walter to a clinic. Something wasn't right. That afternoon, while Catherine went out to handle company matters, Margaret made a decision. She wrote down Michael's address on a piece of paper and asked Nurse Martha to keep an eye on Walter. "I'm going out for a few hours," said Margaret. "If my daughter asks, tell her I went to the bank." Hopetown was on the other side of the city, a simple neighborhood where the houses were small but well kept. Margaret had never been to that area before, and the contrast with her life in the upscale neighborhood made her reflect on how distant she had become from most people's reality. Maple Street was a steep hill with uneven cobblestones. Number 127 was a modest house, painted light blue, with a small garden in front where a middle-aged woman was watering the plants. "Good afternoon," said Margaret, approaching. "I'm looking for Michael Harrison." The woman looked at Margaret with curiosity, noticing her fine clothes and the difference in social class. "That's me, Rebecca, Michael's wife," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "He's not home right now. He went to work. Did something happen?" "My name is Margaret Thompson. My husband is admitted at Mercy Memorial Hospital, and yesterday your Michael went to his room saying he could help." Rebecca's face lit up. "Oh, you're the businessman's wife. Michael came home yesterday very shaken, said he had recognized the boss from when he was a child. Is it true then? Did he really witness something similar?" "Yes, ma'am. Michael never forgot that story. His father, my father-in-law Robert, always told about the day the boss almost passed, but was saved by old Benjamin." Margaret felt a mix of hope and anxiety. "Where can I find your Michael now?" "He's working at the hospital itself, on the renovation of the 3rd floor. But after what happened yesterday, he's afraid to approach your husband again." "I need to talk to him. It's very important." Rebecca invited Margaret in to have some coffee while they waited for Michael to arrive. The house was simple but cozy, with family photos on the walls and the smell of home cooking coming from the kitchen. "Michael is a good man," said Rebecca, serving the coffee. "He always wanted to help people. When he came home yesterday and told about your husband, he couldn't sleep all night." "Why?" "Because he saw in your husband's eyes the same thing he saw when he was a child. The desperation of someone who is conscious but can't communicate." Margaret felt her eyes welling up. "The doctors say they don't know what to do. They want to transfer my husband to a long-term care facility." "And do you want that?" "I don't know what I want anymore. I only know I can't give up on him." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. At 6 in the evening, Michael came home covered in paint and cement, surprised to find a visitor. Margaret immediately stood up when she saw him. "Mr. Harrison, I need your help," she said without beating around the bush. Michael looked at his wife, who nodded for him to listen. "Ma'am, yesterday was a complicated situation. Your daughter doesn't want me to approach your husband." "Forget my daughter for a moment. Tell me exactly what happened 40 years ago." Michael sat down heavily in the chair, still processing the presence of the businessman's wife in his home. "It was 1984, I was 5 years old," he began. My father was working on the construction of your Walter's first factory over in the industrial district. It was a big project, lots of people working. And the accident? Your husband was testing a new production line. There were some experimental chemicals, things he was developing to make more effective cleaning products. During the test there was a leak, and your Walter swallowed some of the liquid. Margaret listened attentively, noticing that Michael spoke with the precision of someone who had stored every detail in his memory. Within minutes, he couldn't speak or swallow anymore. He was taken to the hospital, but the doctors back then didn't know what to do. Your Walter was hospitalized for days, wasting away. And then? My father was very worried, because he liked the boss very much. Mr. Walter always treated workers fairly, paid on time, treated everyone well. So my father went to find old Benjamin. Who was this Benjamin? An elderly man who lived on the outskirts. Must have been around 80 at the time. People said he understood ailments that doctors couldn't cure. He was part healer, part folk healer. Michael paused to take a sip of coffee, gathering his memories. My father took old Benjamin to the hospital. At first the doctors didn't want to allow it, but Mr. Walter's family was desperate, just like you are now. What did he do? Benjamin said that when someone swallows something they shouldn't, sometimes residue gets stuck in the throat, in a place tests can't see. He put his finger in your husband's mouth and did a specific massage, pressing certain points in the throat. And it worked? In less than 10 minutes, Mr. Walter coughed up a small, slimy lump and started speaking again. The doctors were baffled. Margaret felt her heart race. And did you learn the technique? I was a child, but I was fascinated. I watched everything, asking old Benjamin how he knew where to press. He taught me some basics before he left. Michael, do you believe you can help my husband? Michael hesitated. Mrs. Margaret, I'm not a doctor. I could be wrong about what's happening with your Walter. But will you try? Of course I will. Your husband helped me greatly in the past. How so? Michael exchanged a look with his wife before answering. About 15 years ago, my oldest daughter, Emily, got very sick. She needed a very expensive surgery I could never afford. Out of nowhere, an anonymous benefit appeared that covered all the costs. Margaret was intrigued. And did you find out who it was? Years later, we learned it had been Mr. Walter. He heard about our situation through one of the factory workers and decided to help, but without us knowing. Walter never told me that. Your husband helped many families over the years, always in secret, never seeking recognition. Margaret felt a deep emotion rise in her chest. Even after so many years of marriage, she was still discovering new aspects of her husband's generosity. So you'll help us? I will, but it has to be now, tonight. If your daughter finds out you came here, she won't allow it. How will we do it? The hospital has security. Rebecca worked as a cleaning assistant at Mercy Memorial for 10 years, said Michael, looking at his wife. She knows every corner of the hospital. I can get you cleaning uniforms, said Rebecca. At night, hardly anyone pays attention to the cleaning staff. Margaret couldn't believe she was planning to sneak into the hospital where everyone knew her, but the prospect of helping Walter was stronger than any fear. What time? 2 in the morning, said Michael. That's when there's the least activity. At 2 in the morning, Margaret was in the hospital parking lot wearing a blue cleaning uniform Rebecca had gotten. Michael and Rebecca waited for her with cleaning carts and supplies. Remember, whispered Rebecca, walk slowly, don't look directly at the cameras, and act like you're working. The plan was simple. Rebecca would distract the guard at reception while Michael and Margaret went up to the 3rd floor. Since Margaret knew the hospital well, she would guide Michael to room 312. Everything went according to plan until they reached the hallway outside Walter's room. A nurse Margaret didn't recognize was coming out of the room next door. Good evening, said the nurse. Are you new here? We're from the extra shift, Michael replied quickly. We're doing a special cleaning in room 312. Strange, no one told me. I'll check with supervision. Margaret felt panic take over, but Michael stayed calm. The order came directly from administration, he said. Businessman Walter Thompson's room needs to be disinfected before a medical committee visit tomorrow morning. The nurse seemed to accept the explanation and went on her way. Inside the room, Walter was awake, staring at the ceiling. When he saw Margaret approach, his eyes filled with tears. "Hi, sweetheart," whispered Margaret, holding her husband's hand. "I brought Michael here to try to help you." Walter's eyes moved toward Michael, who was approaching the bed. "Mr. Thompson, I'm going to try to do what old Benjamin did 40 years ago," said Michael. "If you feel anything strange, try to let me know by blinking your eyes." Michael took a deep breath and carefully placed his index finger in Walter's mouth. The businessman didn't resist, just kept his eyes fixed on Michael's face. "I'm going to press some points," murmured Michael, moving his finger slowly along Walter's throat. "If it hurts, blink twice." For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Michael changed the position of his finger, pressing different areas of the throat, always careful and attentive to Walter's reactions. Suddenly, Walter began to make a strange sound, as if trying to cough. His eyes widened, and he started moving his head. "Something's happening," whispered Margaret. Michael continued the massage, now more firmly, pressing a specific point on the side of the throat. Walter began making movements with his tongue, pushing something forward. "Wait," said Michael, changing the position of his finger. "There's something here." At that moment, the hallway lights came on, and loud voices approached the room. Catherine had arrived at the hospital for an unexpected nighttime visit and discovered strangers in her father's room. "What's going on here?" she shouted, entering the room followed by 2 security guards and Dr. Williams. "Catherine, let Michael finish," pleaded Margaret, without letting go of her husband's hand. "This man has his finger in my father's mouth. Call hospital administration." In the midst of the confusion, Walter began to thrash violently in bed, making desperate sounds as if trying to speak. "He's choking!" shouted Dr. Williams. "Get that man away from him now!" But Michael didn't move, realizing something was finally happening. "Mr. Thompson, try to cough," he said, keeping his finger in position. Walter made a tremendous effort, contracting all the muscles in his face and neck. Suddenly, something small and dark came out of his mouth and fell onto the bed. Silence fell over the room. Walter took a deep breath for the first time in weeks, as if breathing fresh air after being submerged for a long time. "Margaret," he said, his voice hoarse but clear. "My Margaret." Everyone stood frozen. Dr. Williams approached the bed, incredulous, while Catherine stared fixedly at the small object that had come out of her father's mouth. "What is this?" asked the doctor, picking up the object with tweezers. It was a small pill, partially dissolved and covered with a viscous substance. "This is impossible," murmured Dr. Williams. "We did all the tests. There was nothing obstructing the passage." "It was stuck in a place the tests couldn't detect," explained Michael. "That's why Mr. Thompson couldn't swallow or speak properly." Walter tried to sit up in bed, still weak but visibly better. "Michael Harrison," he said, his voice still weak. "Robert Harrison's son." "You remember," said Michael, smiling. "How could I forget? You saved my life when you were just a boy, watching everything old Benjamin did." Catherine was still in shock, looking from her father to the pill in the doctor's tweezers. "Doctor, what medicine is this?" she asked, her voice strangely nervous. Dr. Williams examined the pill more closely. "I can't identify it without lab analysis, but it seems to be something that wasn't in your father's prescribed medication." The atmosphere in the room changed completely. Margaret noticed Catherine's growing nervousness and began connecting some dots that hadn't made sense before. "Catherine," said Walter, looking directly at his daughter, "what medication have you been giving me besides what the doctors prescribed?" I haven't," stammered Catherine. "Daughter, answer me." Catherine looked at Dr. Williams, who avoided her gaze, and then at Michael and Margaret, who watched her with increasing suspicion. "I just wanted you to get better," she said with tears in her eyes. "I bought some vitamin supplements online. I thought they could help." "What kind of supplements?" asked Michael. "They were for memory and concentration. I thought they could help Daddy recover faster." Margaret felt a chill in her stomach. "Catherine, where are these pills?" "At home, in my purse." "Bring them," ordered Walter with a firmness that surprised everyone. "Bring them now." While Catherine left to get the pills, Margaret stayed alone in the room with Walter, Michael, and Dr. Williams. The doctor was visibly uncomfortable, constantly adjusting his glasses and avoiding eye contact. "Doctor," said Walter, still with a weak but authoritative voice, "did you know my daughter was giving me unprescribed medication? Well, she mentioned wanting to complement the treatment with some natural supplements. And you approved?" "Not exactly approved, but I thought it wouldn't do any harm." Michael realized there had been something strange about the interaction between the doctor and Catherine since the first day. "Doctor, may I ask you something?" said Michael. "Why were you in such a hurry to transfer Mr. Walter to a clinic?" "Well, the case was dragging on, and specialized care would be more appropriate. But now that he's talking, do you still think he needs to be transferred?" Dr. Williams didn't answer immediately, which further increased everyone's suspicions in the room. Catherine returned an hour later with a small box of medicine. Walter took the box and read the label, his expression growing increasingly serious. "Catherine, these aren't vitamins," he said. "This is medication for dementia, used in severe Alzheimer's cases. I read online that it could help with memory problems. Daughter, this type of medication can cause exactly the symptoms I was having, especially when mixed with other medicines." The truth was finally coming out. Margaret looked at her daughter with a mixture of horror and disappointment. "Catherine, why did you do this?" "Mum, I didn't know it would cause problems. I just wanted—" "You wanted what?" asked Walter, his voice growing stronger with each word. Catherine began to cry, but it wasn't the cry of someone remorseful. It was the cry of someone who had been discovered. "Daddy, you don't understand the pressure I was under at the company. Competitors were taking advantage of your absence to steal our clients. I needed to make important decisions, but everyone questioned my authority." "And what does that have to do with you giving me unprescribed medication? I thought if you were a little confused, for a while it would be easier for me to take temporary control of the company." The silence that followed was deafening. Walter looked at his daughter as if seeing a stranger. "You wanted to incapacitate me to take over my company? It wasn't forever. It was just until things settled down." "Catherine," said Margaret with a trembling voice, "you nearly destroyed your father. He could have—" "I know, Mum. I know I was wrong. But I panicked when I saw the medication was having more effect than I expected." Michael, who had remained silent watching the family fall apart before his eyes, finally spoke. "That's why Dr. Williams wanted to transfer your Walter to a clinic, to hide what was happening." All eyes turned to the doctor, who was visibly pale. "Doctor," said Walter, "did you know what my daughter was doing?" She told me they were just supplements." "Don't lie," said Catherine, desperation in her voice. "Doctor, tell the truth." Dr. Williams took a deep breath before speaking. "Your daughter came to me 2 months ago before you got sick. She said she was worried about your forgetfulness and asked to include some extra medications in your treatment." "What forgetfulness?" asked Walter. "I didn't have any memory problems." "She showed me some documents indicating you had signed contradictory papers at the company, forgotten important meetings." "What documents? Show me these documents." Catherine began to sob. "I forged some papers, Dad, just to convince the doctor that you needed help." The revelation hit the room like a bomb. Walter tried to get up from the bed, but he was still too weak. "Catherine, you planned all this. Forged documents, convinced a doctor to medicate me improperly, and when the situation got out of control, you still tried to have me admitted to a clinic to hide what you had done. Dad, forgive me. I never meant for it to go this far." "And you, Dr. Williams," said Walter, staring intently at the doctor. "What was your part in this?" Well, your daughter offered me a considerable sum to speed up the admission process." Margaret could no longer contain her anger. "You almost killed my husband, for money and power." Michael, who had saved Walter, now found himself in the middle of a family tragedy he never imagined witnessing. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "do you want me to call someone, the authorities?" Walter thought for a few seconds before answering. "No, Michael. I don't want to involve the authorities, but I want everyone out of my room now, except you and my wife. Dad, let me explain better. Leave, Catherine, now." Catherine left crying, followed by Dr. Williams, who knew his career at the hospital had come to an end. Alone in the room, Walter held Margaret's and Michael's hands. "Michael, I have no words to thank you for what you did. You saved me from a terrible situation. Mr. Thompson, you helped me a great deal in the past. It was the least I could do. It wasn't the least. You risked your safety, stood up to doctors and security guards, all to help someone you barely knew. Margaret squeezed her husband's hand. Walter, I need to tell you something I discovered about our daughter. Go on. While you were sick, she was making decisions at the company that weren't in your best interest. She sold shares to competitors, fired long-time employees, changed suppliers. Walter closed his eyes, absorbing another painful revelation. She destroyed everything I built over 40 years. Not everything, said Michael. The foundation of your company still exists. The employees who weren't fired still respect you. The clients who weren't lost still trust your work. Michael is right, agreed Margaret. You can rebuild. You're more experienced now. Walter looked at Michael with a thoughtful expression. Michael, answer me one thing honestly. What do you think I should do about Catherine? Michael hesitated before answering. Mr. Thompson, I'm not the one who should decide that. But I can say one thing. The person who saved my daughter 15 years ago wasn't someone vengeful. He was someone who believed in giving second chances. Do you think she deserves a second chance after what she did? I think she needs help. What she did was very serious, but perhaps it was out of desperation and not pure malice. Margaret looked surprised at Michael. Even after everything that had happened, he still found compassion for Catherine. Michael, you're a better man than I am, said Walter. If I were you, after everything my daughter did, I wouldn't be able to speak of her with such generosity. Mr. Thompson, everyone makes mistakes. The difference lies in how we handle those mistakes after they happen. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the following days, Walter recovered quickly. The effects of the improper medication gradually diminished, and his physical strength returned almost completely to normal. Michael visited the hospital every day after work, bringing news from the outside world and talking about life. A genuine friendship had blossomed between the two men, based on mutual gratitude and respect. Michael, I want to make you a proposal, Walter said one Thursday afternoon. Go ahead, Mr. Thompson. I want you to work with me at the company, not as a construction worker, but as a supervisor for construction and renovations. Michael was surprised by the proposal. Mr. Thompson, I don't have the education for that. You have something more important than education. You have character, and you also have practical knowledge that many people with degrees don't have. But the company is going through difficulties because of the problems Catherine caused. That's exactly why I need people I can trust. People who won't stab me in the back when I'm vulnerable. Michael thought about the proposal for a few seconds. Can I keep living in Hopetown? Of course. In fact, I want to set up a regional office there in your neighborhood. There are many business opportunities in that area that the big companies ignore. And my family, my wife and my children? Rebecca can work in administration if she wants, and your children will have scholarships for any course they choose. Michael felt his eyes well up. Mr. Thompson, this is too generous. It's not generosity, Michael. It's justice. You saved my life and the company. It's the least I can do. Meanwhile, Catherine had been removed from all her functions at the company and was facing the consequences of her actions. Dr. Williams had been fired from the hospital and was facing an ethics hearing before the medical board. Margaret visited her daughter regularly, trying to help her deal with the guilt and shame. It was a difficult process, but she believed Catherine could redeem herself if she truly repented. "Mum, how is Dad?" Catherine asked during one of these visits. "Your father is recovering well, physically and emotionally. Is he still very angry with me?" "Catherine, your father isn't angry. He's disappointed and hurt. That's worse than anger, isn't it? Much worse. But it's not irreversible." Catherine began to cry. "Mum, I ruined everything. The company, my relationship with Dad, our family. You made some very serious mistakes, my dear, but you can still try to fix them." "How?" "Dad will never trust me again. Maybe not to run the company, but he can trust you as a daughter if you show you've truly changed." "What do I need to do?" First, you need to take full responsibility for what you did. No excuses, no trying to downplay it. Second, you need to do everything possible to repair the damage. And third, you need to prove with actions, not words, that you've changed. Catherine reflected on her mother's words for a few days before making a decision. She went to see Walter at the hospital on a Sunday afternoon, when she knew he would be alone. "Dad, can I talk to you?" Walter looked at his daughter with a neutral expression. "Of course, have a seat." "Dad, I came here to take full responsibility for what I did. There are no excuses for my actions. I planned to incapacitate you to take control of the company, and when things got out of hand, I tried to hide what I had done." Walter listened silently. "I know you'll probably never forgive me, and I understand that. But I want you to know that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to repair the harm I've done. How do you plan to do that?" "First, I'll return all the stocks I sold illegally. I'll use my own inheritance to buy them back from the competitors. That will use up all the money you have, I know. Second, I'll seek out all the employees I unfairly fired and offer them compensation out of my own pocket." "Go on." "Third, I'll permanently step away from any executive role in the company. I don't want power over anything or anyone anymore." Walter remained silent for a few minutes, processing his daughter's words. "Catherine, are you serious about this?" "Completely serious, Dad. I know I can't undo what I did, but I can try to minimize the damage." "And what do you plan to do with your life after this?" "I don't know yet. Maybe work as a regular employee at some company, start from scratch. I need to learn humility." Walter got up from the bed and walked to the window, looking at the city below. "Catherine, what you did was terrible. You almost killed me and destroyed 40 years of work." "I know, Dad, but I also know you're my daughter, and I know that deep down, beneath all this uncontrolled ambition, the girl I raised still exists." Catherine began to cry. "I'll accept your proposal for reparation, but with some conditions." "What conditions?" "First, you'll work as a volunteer at an institution that helps underprivileged people. I want you to understand the value of work without financial reward." "Yes, Dad." "Second, you'll undergo therapy with a psychologist to understand why you made those decisions. I want you to truly change, not just out of remorse." "I agree." "And third, when you've proven you've really changed, after a few years, perhaps we can talk about you returning to work at the company, not as an executive, but as a regular employee." Catherine looked at her father in surprise. "Dad, would you give me a second chance?" "Catherine, I believe in second chances, but only when they're earned through hard work and dedication." The Thompson family's recovery process was long and difficult, but gradual. Walter returned to lead the company with a new perspective on life and business. Michael became one of his closest collaborators, bringing a practical and human vision to the company's operations. Under his supervision, the company expanded to outlying regions of the city, offering jobs and opportunities to underprivileged communities. Rebecca took over the administrative coordination of the regional office in Hopetown, proving to be extremely competent in organization and customer relations. Michael's children received full scholarships and excelled in their respective fields. The oldest decided to study civil engineering to work with his father, while the youngest chose medicine, inspired by the story of how folk knowledge saved Walter's life. Catherine strictly fulfilled all the conditions imposed by her father. She worked for 3 years as a volunteer at an organization that cared for abandoned elderly people, an experience that completely changed her perspective on life. Therapy helped her understand that her obsessive need for control came from deep fears of abandonment and inadequacy. Gradually, she learned to find value in herself through service to others, not through power over them. After 4 years, Walter offered his daughter a position as the company's social work assistant, coordinating social responsibility programs. It was an important job, but without executive power, exactly what Catherine needed to continue her process of personal growth. The relationship between father and daughter never returned to what it was before, but it evolved into something more mature and honest. Catherine learned to respect the boundaries set by her father, and Walter learned to value his daughter's genuine transformation. Margaret became a central figure in the new family dynamic, serving as a bridge between Walter and Catherine during the reconciliation process. Her wisdom and patience were fundamental in keeping the family united during the most difficult moments. Dr. Williams lost his medical license after the ethical proceedings, but this led him to a deep reflection about his career and values. He decided to study alternative medicine and work in underprivileged communities, where he learned to value the folk knowledge he once dismissed. Mercy Memorial Hospital implemented new protocols to prevent similar situations from occurring, including stricter supervision of patient medication and training on the importance of considering unconventional approaches when traditional medicine finds no answers. Michael became known in the local medical community as someone who possessed valuable knowledge about traditional healing techniques. He began giving lectures at hospitals and medical schools about the importance of integrating folk knowledge with modern medicine. His story with Walter inspired other similar cases in the city, where simple workers helped doctors find solutions to complex problems. The partnership between academic knowledge and folk wisdom became more accepted and valued. Walter's company became a reference in social responsibility, offering not only jobs, but also education and health programs for underprivileged communities. The Hopetown office became a community center, serving everyone from children to the elderly. Years later, when Michael was already established as one of Walter's main collaborators, he reflected on how a simple gesture of compassion had changed not just 2 lives, but an entire network of people around them. "You know, Mr. Thompson," said Michael one afternoon as they walked through the construction site of a new social project, "sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't entered your room that day. I probably would have been transferred to a clinic and spent the rest of my life as a vegetable," replied Walter. "And Catherine would have taken over the company and completely destroyed it. And I would have remained just a construction worker, never discovering I could do more for my community. Michael, you were always more than a construction worker. You're a man who sees beyond appearances, who isn't intimidated by authorities when you know you're right, and who puts others' well-being before your own. I learned that from my father, who learned it from old Benjamin. It's a chain of solidarity that passes from generation to generation. And now you're passing that on to your children and other people in the community." Michael smiled, remembering how everything had begun with entering the wrong hospital room. Life is funny, isn't it? Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest gestures. The smallest gesture can save a life, Michael, and one life saved can transform many others. They continued walking, observing the activity at the construction site where dozens of people worked on building a community center that would offer free medical services to the underprivileged population. Among the workers was a young, recently graduated doctor who had been inspired by the story of Michael and Walter to specialize in integrative medicine, combining modern techniques with traditional knowledge. Also working there was a former employee who had been fired by Catherine during her management, and who now coordinated a professional training program for young people from the outskirts. The transformation had created ripples that spread far beyond the Thompson family and Michael Harrison's life. Dozens of people had been positively impacted, directly or indirectly, by that moment when a construction worker decided to trust his intuition and challenge medical authority to save a life. In the late afternoon, when the work at the site was finished, Michael and Walter said goodbye at the door of the Hopetown office. It was a routine they had developed over the years, talking about the day's projects and planning the next day's activities. "Michael, tomorrow we have the opening of the medical clinic," said Walter. "Did you invite the community folks?" "Yes, I did. And I also called some doctors from Mercy Memorial Hospital who were interested in our integrated care model." "Great. It's important that they see how folk knowledge can complement modern medicine, not compete with it. Mr. Walter, can I ask a personal question?" "Of course." "Have you completely forgiven Catherine?" Walter thought for a few seconds before answering. "Forgiveness is a process, Michael. It doesn't happen overnight, but I can say I no longer feel anger or resentment. I see my daughter as someone who made serious mistakes, but is working sincerely to redeem herself." "And is that enough?" "For me, yes. I can't change the past, but I can influence the future. and the future I'm building with her is based on gradually earned trust, not blind forgiveness." Michael nodded in agreement. "That's great wisdom, Mr. Walter. It's wisdom I learned from you, Michael. The day you saved me, you didn't know if I was a good or bad person. But you decided to help me because you saw someone who needed help. That taught me that sometimes we have to act with compassion even when we don't have all the information. And now I'm applying that same logic with Catherine. I see someone who needs help to become a better person, and I'm offering that help within my limits." They said goodbye with a warm handshake, as they did every day. It was more than a professional greeting. It was the mutual recognition of two people who had saved each other at different times in their lives. That night at home, Michael told Rebecca about the conversation with Walter. "You know, honey, sometimes I think we saved Walter that day at the hospital, but he also saved us." "How so?" asked Rebecca. "He gave us opportunities we would never have had as a construction workers' family. But more than that, he showed us that it's possible to use success to help other people, not just to accumulate wealth." "That's true. Our children grew up seeing that, and I think it will mark them forever. I hope so. I want them to understand that no matter what position they hold in life, there's always someone who needs help." "Do you think Walter has really forgiven Catherine?" Michael thought about his wife's question. "I think he understood something that took me a while to understand. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or going back to the way things were. Forgiveness means choosing not to let the past destroy the future. That's an important difference. Very important. Catherine will never again be the favorite daughter who could do anything, but she can be a daughter who earned her father's respect through hard work and genuine change. And that's better for everyone." "Exactly. It's a more honest and mature relationship." The next morning, the day of the clinic's inauguration, Michael woke up early and went to check the final preparation details. It was an important moment for the Hopetown community, which would finally have access to quality medical services without needing to travel to the city center. The clinic had been designed to integrate modern medicine with traditional healing practices. There were conventional offices equipped with state-of-the-art technology, but also rooms for herbal medicine, acupuncture, and other alternative techniques. The pilot project had sparked interest from universities and hospitals across the country. If successful, it could be replicated in other underserved communities. Around 9 in the morning, guests began arriving for the inauguration ceremony. Doctors, nurses, community leaders, university representatives, and even some journalists interested in the unusual story that had led to the clinic's creation. Walter arrived accompanied by Margaret and Catherine. It was one of the first times Catherine had participated in a public company event since the scandal, and Michael noticed she was visibly nervous. "Good morning, Michael," said Catherine, greeting him respectfully. "Congratulations on the project. What you've built here is truly impressive." "Thank you, Catherine. Your father was essential to making this possible." "I know. And I also know that you were essential in ensuring my father is still here to make it possible." It was the first time Catherine had directly acknowledged Michael's role in saving his father's life. There was a genuine humility in her voice that impressed Michael. "We all make mistakes, Catherine. What matters is that we learn from them. I'm trying to learn, Michael, every day." The inauguration ceremony was simple but moving. Walter gave a speech about the importance of integrating different forms of knowledge to better serve the community. Michael was invited to speak about his experience and the story that had led to the clinic's creation. It was the first time he publicly shared all the details of what had happened at the hospital. "When I entered that room by mistake," Michael told the audience, "I never imagined I was beginning a journey that would change not only my life, but the lives of many people." He spoke about old Benjamin, about his father Robert, about the simple technique that had saved Walter 40 years earlier and again years later. "The lesson I learned is that true knowledge has no owner or diploma. It may be found at the university, but it can also be found in the wisdom of an elderly man from the outskirts who dedicated his life to helping others." The audience applauded, and Michael saw tears in the eyes of several people, including some doctors who had initially been skeptical about the project. After the ceremony, while people were touring the clinic facilities, Dr. Richard Williams approached Michael. It was the first time they had met since that night at the hospital. "Michael, may I speak with you?" Michael was surprised to see the former doctor, but agreed to talk. "Doctor, I didn't expect to see you here. I heard about the inauguration and wanted to come apologize personally to you and to Walter." "You don't need to apologize to me, Doctor. You were a victim of Catherine's manipulation just as much as Walter was." "No, Michael. I was an accomplice. I accepted money to speed up a process I knew wasn't right. My greed was as dangerous as her ambition." Michael looked at the man before him. Dr. Williams was visibly thinner, wearing simple clothes, very different from the imposing figure who had led the medical team at Mercy Memorial Hospital. "What are you doing now?" "I work at a health clinic on the outskirts of Aurora. The pay is low, but I'm learning things I never learned in university." "What kind of things?" "I'm learning that medicine isn't just about diagnosing illnesses and prescribing medication. It's about understanding people as complete human beings with stories, fears, hopes." Michael was impressed by the change in the man. "And how does it feel working like this?" "More fulfilling than I've felt in years of my career at the private hospital. At the clinic, people come to me because they trust me, not because they have money to pay." "Doctor, may I ask a question?" "Of course. Would you like to work here at the clinic? We need doctors who understand both modern medicine and the importance of alternative approaches." Dr. Williams was surprised by the proposal. "Michael, after what I did, would you still trust me?" "Doctor, you made a serious mistake, but you're working to redeem yourself. That's what matters." "But would Walter agree?" "Let's ask him." They approached Walter, who was talking with some visiting doctors about the clinic's protocols. "Mr. Walter," said Michael, "Dr. Williams would like to speak with you." Walter looked at the former doctor with a neutral expression. "Doctor." "Walter, I came here to personally apologize for what I did. There's no justification for my actions. I accept your apology, Doctor. And also to say that I greatly admire what you're doing here. It's a model of care that should be replicated across the country." "Thank you." Michael asked if I would like to work here. "I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I would very much like to contribute to this project." Walter looked at Michael, who gave a positive nod. "Doctor, everyone deserves a second chance when they show genuine remorse and willingness to change. Does that mean you accept my participation?" "It means I'm willing to give you an opportunity to prove you've changed, but it will be a one-time opportunity. Any slip-up and our partnership ends immediately. I understand perfectly, and I accept those conditions." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a reporting crew from a local television station. The journalist wanted to interview Michael and Walter about the unusual story that had resulted in the creation of the clinic. "Is it true that a construction worker saved a businessman's life using a technique he learned as a child?" asked the reporter. "It's true," replied Walter, "but the story is more complex than that. Michael not only saved my life, he saved my company, my family, and helped me discover a greater purpose for my wealth." "And how do you feel being called a hero?" asked the reporter to Michael. "I don't consider myself a hero," replied Michael. "I just did what anyone should do when they see someone in trouble. I tried to help." "But you risked a lot by challenging medical authority." "Sometimes we have to trust our intuition and do what we believe is right, even when the authorities disagree." The interview was broadcast on the local news that evening and resonated throughout the city. The story of Michael and Walter became a symbol of the importance of valuing different forms of knowledge and the possibility of personal transformation through service to others. In the following weeks, the clinic received dozens of visitors interested in learning about the integrated care model. Doctors, nurses, medical students, and even government representatives visited the facilities. The project attracted interest from a major university, which proposed a partnership to develop care protocols that combined modern medicine with traditional healing practices. Michael found himself in the unusual position of medical project consultant, guiding professionals on how to integrate folk knowledge into hospital settings. "It's funny," he commented to Rebecca one evening. "A few years ago I was just a construction worker nobody took seriously. Now I'm giving lectures to doctors. You always had that knowledge, my dear. You just needed an opportunity to show it. And to think it all started because I walked into the wrong room, or the right room at the right time. Michael smiled, remembering the strange feeling he had when he saw Walter for the first time. It was as if some higher force had guided his steps that day. Months after the clinic's opening, Michael received an unexpected invitation. A university in New York wanted him to participate in a conference on integrative medicine, sharing his experience and discussing the importance of valuing traditional knowledge. "Mr. Thompson, do you think I should accept?" asked Michael. "Of course you should. Your story could inspire changes throughout the country's healthcare system. But I'm not an academic. I don't have formal studies in medicine." "Michael, you have something more valuable than formal studies. You have real experience and the courage to put people's well-being above rigid protocols. And what if I say something foolish in front of all those doctors and professors? You won't say anything foolish. You'll speak the truth of your experience, and truth is never foolish." Michael decided to accept the invitation. Rebecca and the children supported his decision, proud to see their father being recognized for his contribution to medicine. The day before his trip to New York, Michael visited his father's grave at the Hopetown Cemetery. It was something he did regularly, but this time he had a special reason. "Dad," he said, kneeling before the simple headstone, "remember that story you always told about old Benjamin and the boss who swallowed the chemical? Well, that story saved the same man's life 40 years later, and now it's changing medicine in a way neither you nor old Benjamin could have imagined." He stayed there for a few minutes, feeling a deep connection with his father and with old Benjamin, as if he were part of a lineage of simple people who carried valuable knowledge. "Dad, tomorrow I'm going to speak to hundreds of doctors about the importance of what you taught me. I'll represent you, old Benjamin, and all the simple workers who know important things but are never heard." The conference in New York was a success. Michael told his story to an audience of over 500 healthcare professionals who listened in respectful silence. When he finished his presentation, he received a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Several doctors approached him afterward to discuss ways to implement similar approaches in their own hospitals and clinics. "Professor Harrison," said a young doctor, "your presentation changed my view of medicine." Michael was surprised to be called professor, but he didn't correct her. After all, he was truly teaching something valuable to those people. "Doctor, what impressed you the most?" "The idea that medical knowledge isn't exclusive to those with diplomas, and especially the courage to act when you know something is wrong, even when facing authorities. Sometimes you need courage to do what's right. But how do you develop that courage?" Michael thought about the question for a few seconds. "I think courage comes from caring more about people's well-being than your own safety. When you see someone suffering and know you can help, fear becomes secondary." "That's a valuable lesson." "It's a lesson I learned from my father, who learned it from old Benjamin, and now I'm passing it on to you." When Michael returned to Denver, a surprise was waiting for him. Walter had organized a small party at the clinic to celebrate the success of his participation in the conference. "Michael," said Walter, "I have a proposal for you." "Go ahead, Mr. Thompson." "Several universities contacted me after the conference. They want you to develop a teaching program about integrative medicine, but I don't have the training for that. You have the most important training, real experience. They want you to teach medical students to value folk knowledge and to have the courage to act when necessary." Michael became thoughtful. "Would I be like a real professor?" "You'd be like a visiting professor. You'd keep working with us, but a few times a month you'd teach at universities." "And do you think I'm capable of that?" "Michael, you transformed the medicine of an entire city. Of course you're capable." The proposal meant a radical change in Michael's life. From a construction worker with no formal education, he would become an educator in integrative medicine, respected by professionals from all over the country. "Can I think about it?" "Of course, but don't take too long. The universities are eager to start." That night, Michael talked at length with Rebecca about the proposal. "Honey, are you sure you want to accept?" she asked. "I'm afraid I'm not up to it." "Michael, you saved a man's life, transformed a family, created a clinic that's changing medicine. If that doesn't prove you're up to it, I don't know what does." "It's just that I still see myself as a simple construction worker." You're a simple construction worker who happens to know extraordinary things. And that's exactly what the world needs. Simple people with extraordinary knowledge. Michael decided to accept the proposal. In the following months, he began teaching at 3 different universities, teaching medical students about the importance of integrating different forms of knowledge. His classes always started with the story of how he had saved Walter, but expanded into broader discussions about humility, courage, and compassion in medicine. The students loved his classes. Michael spoke simply, without medical jargon, but with a depth of understanding that impressed even the most experienced professors. "Professor Harrison," a student asked during a class, "how can we develop the intuition to know when something is wrong, even without conclusive tests?" "Intuition develops through careful observation and experience," Michael answered. "You need to learn to see the patient as a complete human being, not just as a set of symptoms." "But how do we do that in practice?" "Listen to what the patient is saying, even when they're not speaking. Observe their eyes, their posture, their breathing. Sometimes the body tells a different story than what the tests show." Another student raised their hand. "Professor, do you think traditional medicine sometimes ignores important signs?" "I don't think it ignores them on purpose, but sometimes it gets so focused on protocols and tests that it forgets to look at the basics." "How so?" "In Walter's case, all the tests came back normal, but you just had to observe that he was trying to communicate through his eyes. That was a clear sign that he was conscious and trying to say something. These classes became famous in the universities. Students from other courses began attending them, interested in the humanistic approach that Michael brought to medicine. Walter watched with pride Michael's transformation from construction worker to respected educator. "Michael, do you realize the impact you're having?" he said during a conversation. "Sometimes I still can't believe all this. Hundreds of future doctors are learning from you the importance of having compassion and courage. That will multiply for generations. It's a big responsibility." "Yes, but you're up to it." The Hopetown Clinic also continued to prosper. The integrated care model had proven so effective that the government began considering implementing it in other regions of the state. Dr. Williams had become one of the most respected doctors at the clinic, working especially with complex cases that required an unconventional approach. "You know, Michael," he said once, "working here has taught me more about medicine than all my years of college and specialization." "Why?" "Because here I learned that medicine is about serving people, not about showing off knowledge or making money." Catherine had also found her place in the new family and professional dynamic. Her work coordinating the company's social programs gave her a satisfaction she had never felt when she was in executive leadership. "Dad," she said during a conversation, "I finally understand why you always loved working so much." "How so?" "Before, I worked to accumulate power and recognition. Now, I work to help people. It's completely different." "It's the difference between working for yourself and working for something bigger than you." "Exactly. And it's much more rewarding." "Catherine, I'm proud of the woman you've become." It was the first time in years that Walter had expressed pride in his daughter, and Catherine felt her eyes fill with tears. "Dad, I know I can never undo the harm I did, but I want you to know that I'm grateful for the second chance. My dear, the past can't be changed, but the future can be built. And you're building a future I can be proud of." Years passed, and the story of Michael and Walter became legendary in the medical field. The Hopetown Clinic became a reference center, visited by healthcare professionals from all over the world. Michael, now 50 years old, was recognized as one of the pioneers of integrative medicine in the United States. He had written a book about his experience, which became required reading at several medical schools. Walter, at 75 years old, remained active in the company, but had delegated most of the operational responsibilities to Michael and other trusted employees. Margaret had become a mother figure to many young people in Hopetown, guiding families and helping to resolve community conflicts. The Harrison family had prospered beyond their wildest dreams. Michael's children graduated in their respective fields and returned to work in the community, multiplying the positive impact started by their father. One Sunday afternoon, Michael and Walter walked through the Hopetown neighborhood, observing the changes that had occurred over the years. "Michael, "Do you remember what this place was like when we met?" asked Walter. "It was a forgotten neighborhood, without opportunities, without hope. And look at it now. They stopped in front of a new school that had been built with company resources. Children played in the yard, laughing and running freely. Mr. Thompson, sometimes I feel like I'm dreaming." "You're not dreaming, Michael. You're living the result of right choices made consistently over the years. Choices that began when you decided to trust an unknown construction worker, and when you decided to trust your intuition and challenge medical authority." They continued walking, passing by the clinic that had now expanded into a health complex, serving not only Hopetown, but several neighboring communities. "Michael, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret entering that room that day?" Michael was surprised by the question. "Why would I regret it?" "Your life became much more complicated after that. You took on huge responsibilities. You're constantly traveling to give lectures, dealing with pressures that a simple construction worker would never face." Michael thought about the question for a few moments. "Mr. Thompson, sometimes life takes us to places we never imagined. But that doesn't mean it's bad. Sometimes it means we have a greater purpose than we thought." "And do you think you've found your purpose?" "I think my purpose is to show people that valuable knowledge can come from anywhere, and that everyone has the power to make a difference in other people's lives." "That's a noble purpose." "It's a purpose I learned from you. You could have simply thanked me and gone on with your life. But you chose to include me in your journey and give me opportunities that transformed not just my life, but the lives of my entire family and community." Walter smiled, remembering the nervous young man who had entered his hospital room with clothes stained with cement. "Michael, the truth is you saved me in a much deeper way than just physically." "How so?" "You taught me that a person's true worth isn't in their social position or formal education, but in their compassion and courage to do what's right. You already knew that. That's why you've always helped so many families over the years. I helped financially but kept my distance. You taught me to get personally involved, to know the people I'm helping, to make helping a two-way relationship where I also learn." They arrived at the house where Michael had grown up, now renovated and turned into a community center that offered vocational courses for young people. "This house has a special story," said Michael. "Tell me." "It was here that my father first told me the story of old Benjamin and the boss who swallowed the chemical. I was about 8 years old, and I was fascinated imagining what it would be like to save someone's life. And you ended up saving one. Life has these ironies, doesn't it? The story my father told as a lesson about solidarity became reality 40 years later. And now it's being told to thousands of medical students as a lesson about the importance of integrating different forms of knowledge. It's like a cycle that completes and starts again with each generation. They entered the community center, where Rebecca was coordinating a computer class for seniors. Margaret was among the students, learning to use the computer at 73. "Hi, honey," said Rebecca when she saw Michael. "How was your walk?" "Good. We were reflecting on how life takes us to unexpected places." "It's true. When we got married, I never imagined you'd become a university professor. And I never imagined you'd become a community center coordinator. Opportunities came up, and we decided to take them." Margaret approached, a bit frustrated with the computer. "Michael, can you help me with this? I'm trying to send a message to my sister, but I can't." Michael sat beside her and patiently explained how to use the email program. It was an interesting contrast. The man who gave lectures to specialist doctors teaching an elderly lady to use the computer with the same patience and attention. "There you go, Mrs. Margaret. Now just click here to send." "Thank you, Michael. You have a gift for explaining complicated things simply. It's because I learned that everything gets easier when we truly care about who's listening." Walter watched the scene with emotion. Michael's simplicity and humility remained intact, despite all the recognition he had received. Later, when they returned home, Walter reflected on the day's conversation. "Margaret," he said to his wife, "sometimes I think about what would have happened if Michael hadn't entered my room that day." "I don't like to think about that," she replied. "But I know our family wouldn't be the same today." "You mean the reconciliation with Catherine?" "The reconciliation with Catherine, your new purpose in life. the impact we're having on the community, all that started that day. It's strange how one moment can change the course of so many lives. It wasn't just one moment, Walter. It was Michael's willingness to act in that moment, and his willingness to embrace the change that came afterward. You're right. The moment was important, but the subsequent choices were even more important. And it continues to be. Every day you choose to use your success to help other people instead of just accumulating more wealth. Michael taught me that true success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you're able to give. That's a valuable lesson. It's a lesson I hope our daughters and grandchildren learn too. Catherine, who now visited her parents regularly, had married a doctor who worked at the Hopetown Clinic. Together, they coordinated preventive health programs for underprivileged communities. Her transformation had been so profound that it was hard to recognize the ambitious and calculating woman from years ago. Volunteer work and therapy had revealed a compassionate person who had always existed beneath the layer of insecurity and need for control. "Dad," she said during a visit, "I wanted you to know that I'm pregnant." Walter and Margaret were thrilled with the news. "Congratulations, daughter," said Margaret, hugging her. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be a grandfather," said Walter, with tears in his eyes. "Dad, I want my son to grow up knowing Uncle Michael's story and understanding the importance of helping others." "Uncle Michael?" That's how I think of him now, as someone from the family who will always be around to guide and help. It was an important symbolic change. Michael, who had started as a stranger who invaded the hospital room, was now considered part of the Thompson family. When the baby was born, a boy named Benjamin in honor of the old healer, Michael was chosen as the godfather. "It's an honor," he said when Catherine made the invitation. "The honor is ours, Michael. We want our son to learn from you the values of humility, courage, and compassion. I'll try to be a good example. You already are. You just need to keep being who you are." The baptism of little Benjamin was a special event. Michael gave a speech about the importance of valuing wisdom that passes from generation to generation. "This boy carries the name of a man who never had a diploma, but who knew important things about caring for others," said Michael. "I hope he grows up understanding that a person's worth isn't in their social status, but in their willingness to serve others." The child grew up surrounded by examples of solidarity and service. His first steps were taken at the Hopetown Clinic, among doctors and patients who had known him since he was a baby. Walter, now a grandfather, found a new source of energy and purpose. He wanted to ensure his grandson grew up in a better world than the one he had found. "Michael," he said one day, "I want to expand our programs to other cities in the state." That's an ambitious project. "I'm 78 years old. If I'm going to leave a legacy, I want it to be meaningful. You've already left a meaningful legacy. But I can do more. We can do more." They developed a plan to replicate the Hopetown model in 10 other underprivileged communities. It would be the most ambitious project of their lives, requiring substantial resources and complex coordination. "Will we manage?" asked Michael. "We will manage," replied Walter with conviction. "We have the experience, we have the resources, and more importantly, we have the right motivation." The project took 3 years to implement completely. 10 new clinics were built, each adapted to the specific needs of its community, but all based on the integrative medicine model developed in Hopetown. Michael became the general supervisor of the project, constantly traveling to guide local teams and ensure that care standards were maintained. Each new clinic brought its own challenges and discoveries. In one small town, they found that the community had unique knowledge about medicinal plants. In another, they encountered traditional midwives whose techniques perfectly complemented modern medical procedures. "Every place has its own forms of wisdom," observed Michael during a coordination meeting. "That's why our model works," replied Walter. "We don't try to impose a one-size-fits-all formula. We adapt our approach to local knowledge." The project's success attracted national and international attention. Delegations from other countries visited the clinics to understand how to replicate the model in their own contexts. Michael found himself in the surreal position of giving lectures to health ministers and representatives of international organizations. "It's incredible," he commented to Rebecca after one of these lectures. 10 years ago, I was an unknown construction worker. Today I'm discussing health policies with people who make decisions for millions of people." "And do you feel comfortable in this role?" "Sometimes I still surprise myself, but I've learned that if you have something valuable to share, it doesn't matter where you come from." "What do you consider most valuable in what you have to share?" Michael thought about the question. The idea that everyone has something important to contribute. Old Benjamin, my father, me, you, the doctors, the patients. We all have pieces of a larger puzzle. And your role is to help people see how these pieces fit together. Exactly. It's to show that medicine isn't just about doctors curing patients. It's about entire communities working together to promote health and well-being. The clinics became more than health centers. They became community centers where people gathered to solve problems, celebrate achievements, and support one another. In each of them, the story of Michael and Walter was told as an example of how seemingly casual encounters can have extraordinary consequences. "Do you believe in destiny?" asked a journalist during an interview. "I believe in opportunities," replied Michael, "and I believe that when opportunities appear, we must have the courage to seize them." "And you, Mr. Walter?" "I believe that when we do good, we create positive waves that spread in ways we could never imagine." When Michael turned 55, Walter organized a big party to celebrate not only the birthday, but also the 10-year partnership that had transformed the lives of thousands of people. The party was held at the original clinic in Hopetown, now expanded into a complex that occupied 2 entire blocks. "Michael," said Walter during his speech, 10 years ago you entered my hospital room to save my life. Today I can say that you saved much more than that. You saved my soul, my family, and gave me a greater purpose than I ever imagined having. Mr. Walter, you gave me opportunities that changed not only my life, but the life of my entire family and community." "No, Michael. You created your own opportunities through your work, dedication, and compassion. I just recognized what you already were." The party lasted late into the night, with music, food, and stories being shared among hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the joint work of Michael and Walter. Among those present were doctors, nurses, patients, staff, family members, and residents of the communities served by the clinics. "It's impressive," commented Rebecca, "to see so many different people gathered because 2 people decided to help each other." "It's the multiplier effect of kindness," replied Margaret. "One good deed generates other good deeds, which generate others, and so on." "And it never ends?" "We hope not. We hope our children and grandchildren will continue this chain." When the party ended and everyone had left, Michael and Walter were alone in the clinic, watching the nighttime activity of the district through the window. "You know, Michael, sometimes I think about what I would say to that desperate man who was in that hospital bed 10 years ago." "What would you say?" "I would say that the worst moment of his life was about to become the best moment of his life. And to the nervous construction worker who walked into the wrong room, I would tell him to trust his intuition because it would lead him to extraordinary places." They stayed there for a few more minutes, absorbing the magnitude of what they had built together. "Michael, do you have any regrets about the choices we made?" "No regrets, Mr. Thompson. Only gratitude." "Gratitude for what?" "For having the courage to trust my intuition that day, and for you having the generosity to include me in your journey." "The generosity was mutual, Michael. You included me in a journey much greater than anything I could have imagined on my own." "Where do we go from here?" "We'll keep doing what we know how to do, taking care of people, building communities, and passing our knowledge to the next generation. It's a simple plan, but a beautiful one." The best plans are simple and beautiful. They walked together to the clinic's exit, turning off the lights and locking the doors. It was the end of another workday, but also the continuation of a journey that had begun with a wrong turn in a hospital. End of story. And what about you, dear listener? What did you think of this story of transformation and second chances? Leave your opinion about Michael and Walter's choices in the comments. Do you believe everyone deserves a second opportunity like the one Catherine received? Your participation is very important to us. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories. Thank you for your company.